Assalamualaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Inshallah, you're all well on this beautiful Saturday afternoon, 29th of March, 29th of Ramadan. We're almost there at the finish line. Inshallah, another day, maybe, perhaps, or perhaps, inshallah, today's the last day. So we'll see what the moon sighting is. And regardless, I wish you all the best in this beautiful occasion, this beautiful month, and wish you all the most success and happiness and joy, as well as satisfaction in all your amal. And may it be a blessed year for you all and a beautiful Eid for you and your families. And inshallah, continued in through the rest of the year and first of many Ramadans for you, one of many Ramadans for you. I know for me, it's been a beautiful month. Sad to see it go, very depressing. But with it comes a lot of celebrations that we can carry with us of accomplishments that we have achieved through reading Quran, doing ibadat of different kinds, as well as, most importantly, getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also getting to know ourselves a little bit better. And most importantly, I think out of this month is learning the art of patience and self-reflection. So I hope that you all benefited from this, and I wish you all the best in the upcoming days, weeks, months, and as of course years. So inshallah, if today is the last day of Ramadan and tomorrow is the first of Shawwal and Eid, then obviously I won't be having a program tomorrow. However, if tomorrow is the last day of Ramadan, I might do something special, kind of out of the norm, maybe, perhaps. But today's topic is kind of uncomfortable, I think, for many of us, whether we're suffering from the issue ourselves or with our families or friends or co-workers, colleagues of different kinds. It could be fellow students, what have you. Addiction is a big, big issue here in the United States. It's also a major issue outside in various countries as well, although it seems that in this country, it's on the rise, and it certainly has been on the rise with the opioid epidemic, alcoholism, drugs on a rampant increase, and then obviously a lot of issues with other types of things such as internet abuse, social media addiction, and then a big thing in our younger population is vaping, which used to be the old days of smoking. Another big one on the rise that's been a big, big issue, and we've been focusing a lot on it during the last few days or weeks, has been food addiction. And so there's a lot of kind of issues related to addiction, but it's very interesting as you delve deeper into addiction. There's really three fundamental components. There's a nutrient deficiency, interesting, and we'll learn about that. There's a hormonal imbalance, somewhat self-inflicted hormonal imbalance or neurotransmitter imbalance. And then, of course, you have the nature versus nurture, which is the issue of being, given passed down genes through generations that have potential addiction, within the family. And there's a higher propensity for those that do have addictive personality or behavior within the family that the children or other family members will suffer from this. So it's a big issue. It's a major concern. And I think the Muslim community is definitely not immune from this. So we need to be very vigilant with ourselves, with our family members, fellow members of our masajids, as well as anybody that we can help, either within the community or outside. But this blessed month, beautiful, and I'll give you some data related to this. This blessed month is the first kind of step towards halting addiction. We'll talk about why that is. It's the fasting in and of itself, as well as some of the other behaviors that we learn. And subhanAllah, when Allah gives us guidance to fast and he doesn't just tell you to stop drinking and eating, but many other things, such as, not staying away from haram talk, staying away from haram views with our vision, many other aspects of our life. So very interesting how this month is just not about losing weight and, getting your hormones in balance, insulin resistance. And I'm talking right now, truly just physical, not the spiritual part, which that's a whole different conversation outside the realm of our talk. But addiction does play into that. And it's amazing. Allah has interweaved this into our fasting and into this blessed month. So what addiction do we have? We talked about food. We'll talk a little bit about how we get food addiction, smoking, including vaping. There was a study that was done that showed that smoking and or vaping is tied to actually dementia. It was actually a study done on dementia. It's been known to cause Alzheimer's, blood pressure issues, that most likely the blood pressure issues are what causes the dementia and Alzheimer's. Very interestingly, there is a correlation between high blood pressure and dementia as a result of lack of blood flow getting to the brain cells. Drugs, including the big one nowadays is opioids, where there's significant focus here in the United States and abroad on managing opioid addiction. Gambling, obviously, you've probably heard in your masajids about that. And of course, Allah speaks very directly about gambling in the Quran. Alcohol, obviously, is well known. There was a study in France that showed that drinking alcohol is tied to dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and blood pressure as well. So this is very known well fact. And nowadays, most scientists, academics, as well as any medical healthcare professional, medical professional, will recommend not drinking any alcohol. Zero alcohol is recommended. In the past, they would say, a certain amount was okay, but nowadays, I think that the answer is pretty much zero. And I think that's maybe one of the major reasons why we're seeing a tremendous uptick in non-alcoholic beverages, such as beer, other types of things, like they have non-alcoholic vodka, whiskey, all these different types of alcoholic drinks that people imbibe in, that now they're shifting towards non-alcoholic versions. And it's because of this big push with the latest generation, and more importantly, with some of the more medical data that's showing that alcohol can be extremely damaging to not only your brain, but the rest of your body. Now, interestingly, there was an article and some research done that shows that people that get alcohol addiction, or they become alcoholics, it's actually due to a vitamin B deficiency. Vitamin B as in boy. And so people drink actually alcohol, or they get cravings to drink alcohol for some of those. Some people do it socially and then they get addicted to it. And we'll talk about, why for that. But some data shows that people actually drink alcohol because of the vitamin B deficiency. So if you supplement and give them the vitamin B, they no longer have these alcoholic cravings. So it's very, very interesting. Caffeine is another big addiction we have in the United States. We don't even think of it. People feel like they have to drink caffeine to either function at work or get through the day or go to school and be able to do all those things. Caffeine is ultimately a drug, and it can cause tremendous amount of addiction, although it does have some benefits, as with anything in moderation. But once you go outside of that and become excessive, it becomes a big problem. So let's not underestimate caffeine addiction and how many of us are potentially addicted to caffeine. Obviously, we talked about sex, and pornography is a fairly common issue as well. There's actually been a lot of papers published related to pornography and the addiction to it. And actually, it's very interesting because it will actually have a reverse effect, which is really interesting. And it's making society, in terms of how they perceive relationships, marital relationships, and what have you, in a negative perception. And things are being shifted over the last several years as this has become more and more of an issue. So this is not to be undervalued. But the big one in my mind, I think the one that really impacts all of our communities, and the one that really concerns me over the long run for not only the younger generation, but even adults, is internet and social media addiction. There was actually a study that was published in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. This was quite a while ago. This was in 2009. That internet addiction. So this is internet, slash social media, is most likely to affect youngsters who are depressed, hostile, or have ADHD or attention deficit disorder, or have social phobia. And in this particular study, they found that boys are more susceptible than girls. And people that spend 20 hours a week online or more, these are the people that are going to become addicted. So this is a big issue. This is why I personally have not gotten myself involved in social media. I still continue to refrain from it. I find that keeping the distraction away, or that opportunity, the best that we can. It's just like the same way I try to make sure I stay out of venues or places that would offer alcohol, or stay away from places like Las Vegas that have gambling, stay away from people that are into drinking alcohol or use drugs, or people that take pain medications. I stay away from these types of situations just to not get myself exposed. But this internet, social media is a big issue. So we'll dive into what all this is and what causes it, and maybe potentially opportunities on how to improve it. So let's dive into. We talked about there's three aspects, right? There's genes, which is I think plays a part, maybe not a big part, but there's a neurotransmitter specifically called dopamine. Many of you probably have heard the term dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain, and it's your reward transmitter. So every time you get, quote unquote, a dopamine hit, it's your reward center of your brain getting excited, where you want more. I want more of that, right? I feel good. It's the pat, I think of it as the pat on the back or your hug hormone. So this hormone, or this neurotransmitter, plays a big role into this. So let's delve a little bit deeper into it. So dopamine is intended, Allah created it. Everything has a purpose and intent, is created for motivation and for craving. So it's there to keep us motivated to work, to go support our families, to go hunt for food, to get through our survival mechanism, all that sort of stuff, and to continue to grow and develop, whether that be through school or whatever that may be. It actually has very tremendous positive impact. However, if at the same time, when you're motivated and you have cravings, it can also turn into a negative if it becomes excessive or used in the wrong way. So the reward mechanism, or what we call the reward circuitry, is actually in the prefrontal cortex. Now, interesting here as a side note, in the Quran, where it says, will grab you by your forelocks and drag you by your feet. It's really interesting where Allah talks specifically, because you wonder why not my hands, right? Why not my neck? Why not my body? Pull my body and drag me for punishment. But it's interesting. It's you're always being held accountable to your prefrontal cortex. And your prefrontal cortex is the higher order mental function. That's where all the more developed thinking happens. And it's strictly in humans. It's much larger than any other species. So this is why we're held account, whereas animals and plants and what have you obviously are not held to account, or will not be judged on the day of judgment. And it's also the control center at the same time, where it will kind of be your brake system to say, wait a minute, what you're doing is not right, or this is going to be an issue. So it's very, very interesting. how the prefrontal cortex plays a role. So again, dopamine, big issue. Just as an example of how this dopamine is a big problem, let's use the example of cocaine. I think that's probably the best example. Everybody knows it. The reason why people become addicted to cocaine is because there's a dramatic increase in dopamine, very fast. So as soon as people use cocaine, their dopamine goes flying through the roof. And this is why people want more. Because what happens is that the spike that happens and you get this immediate gratification. There's no waiting, there's no working, right? You do whatever you have to do, whether you inject it or you snort it or you smoke it or whatever the method is. It goes right to the dopamine channel, and then your dopamine goes through the roof. And it's quick. So this is how people get excited. This is a terrible combination when you get this dramatic rush of dopamine and it happens quickly. That's where the danger is. So the brain then learns that, hey, this is an easy way to get dopamine rush. Let's stay on course with this. This is great stuff. Versus if you're going to exercise or go study something and you're getting yourself educated, then the rise of the dopamine is not as high, but then there's also the fact that you have to work for it, right? So you have to get motivated to get up and go run. You have to get motivated to get up and go do a weight workout. You have to get motivated to go study and get good grades, or go, you have to get motivated to go do a job to earn your first paycheck. So this problem with that time that it takes to get there and the length at which you have to work to be able to get it, the brain doesn't want to do that if I can get it faster and I can get that rush much bigger. And the problem is that when you get this tremendously fast rise and this big rise where you see this tremendous rise in dopamine, the problem is that it crashes and you get a trough. And then what happens is it kind of lowers your bar because you have a baseline. So now it lowers the bar that now you kind of go into a lull. This is why people go through kind of the after effect. They go through like depression or down. And then at that point, people need the stimulus, whether that's drugs, alcohol, pornography, social media hits, internet access, reviewing of material. The other thing is related, a big thing that happened after the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, was ordering stuff through Amazon, or ordering and getting food delivered to your home. Real easy, right? You don't even have to now get in your car and go and buy it. You don't have to get in your car. So that in and of itself creates a dopamine rush, and then you get that lull. And this is most likely why we've seen a lot of depression after the depression, loneliness, all these other things, because that spike that we dropped, and now we're trying to get back to normal. So how do you get back to normal, right? That's the difficulty. You need more. And that more that you get, you can't get enough to be able to get you back up to that high. It just won't get there. And so this is why people get blunted and they lose motivation in life and become depressed and feel like they just have lost that spark. So very, very important that we treat the dopamine with fragility and use it very smartly. And at this point, then pursuit doesn't become the pleasure, right? It's just getting to base. I just want to feel normal again, right? It's kind of what these people would say. So people that are using drugs or alcohol, now they're using the drugs or alcohol just to feel normal. They want to say, hey, I just want to feel like, I don't want to feel tired. I don't want to feel depressed. I just want to drink the alcohol, not to get my high. I want to just drink it or use whatever I have to use just so I can function through that day, which is really, really scary. And this applies to anything. This could be caffeine. You get the same effect. Food. And we talked about, all the other things, drugs, alcohol, internet, social media, pornography, any of those, they will give you that same effect. So it's a real issue where you start abusing the dopamine rise. And again, the scary things are when you get the quick. So think about your phone and your social media. Every time you get a bing, that is a dopamine hit. Every time your text goes off, or you get a message on Instagram, or a Facebook hit, or somebody likes you on Twitter, or whatever it is, right? That's your dopamine rush. And so it's immediate, it's instant. My phone's always next to me. I don't have to go working for it. I don't have to go, you know, exercise for it. I don't have to think about it. It's just boom, there it is. There's the rise. But then you get that drop, like I said. So this dopamine is really, really important for us to function, but it can also become a big issue in terms of long-term effects and how we can kind of not become quote unquote dopamine resistant. So we talked about insulin resistance and how the insulin in the cells become resistant because it's just too much going on, right? Too much sugar. I just can't keep up. I can't keep doing this. And so no matter how much insulin you call, it's not happening anymore. It's the same thing with dopamine. So you got to be really careful about not letting that dopamine get to that place. And another big thing that I've read recently was related to video game addiction. So this is another big thing, even tied to like internet, social media, what have you, is the reason why kids and adults of all kinds get addicted to video games is because it's the dopamine rush. And over time, the effect of the video game will die off. You need just to play the video game no longer to get the excitement, but again, to get that dopamine rush, just to be able to survive that day. It's almost like, and I remember when I used to be younger, and we used to, not so much at my younger age, but I used to get to the point where I loved playing the FIFA soccer game when I was in college. And so it was almost like, oh, well, I just got to finish this one game. I just got to get that done. And then I'll feel good once I get that done. So it was all about functioning, right? So that's your brain basically learning, hey, now I've set a different baseline for you. Get me to that baseline. Forget about even getting me to the excitement part. I'm not even here to say I'm motivated now to win a championship or what have you. It's all about, can I just get through the day and survive? And so this is what's going to affect long term, and a lot of scientists are concerned about this, that how is this going to impact human development? Because at the days where we had to, let's say, I remember the good old days of video games, let's use the example of video games, where you would have to, number one, go earn money, right? So you had to go get a job, earn the money, bring it home, and then you would have to go to like either Blockbuster or one of these video warehouses where you would go there and you'd have to take that money and actually go find the game and then go pay for it. So there's work that had to be done. And so when you got it, you felt this sense of satisfaction or accomplishment. Whereas now, on your phone, anywhere you are in the world, you hit a button and the video game or whatever is there at your pleasure. And so it takes seconds, not even minutes, to be able to get access. So where's the motivation, right? And a lot of these games, many games could be free. You could find video games that are free. And so what's the motivation for kids? What's the motivation for adults? What's the motivation for human development? What's my drive? Why do if I can just sit at home and do this, and oh, by the way, at the same time, while I'm playing my video game, I'm also checking my social media, so more dopamine hit. And oh, by the way, at that point, I'm going to order food to be delivered to my house because I don't want to waste time getting in the car or on my bike and go get the food. So now I'm having that delivered. And then, oh, you know what? My ears are starting to hurt, so maybe I also need an earpiece. All these are just one by one dopamine hits. And as these dopamine goes higher and higher and higher, and it's additive, you crash, and then it comes to a point where you're not even motivated to do anything anymore because you're just trying to get to the point where you feel normal so that you can go to school, go to work, function with family, what have you. So this is going to be a big issue in the future of human development. And most likely, we're starting to kind of see a lot of it now where the younger generation has very little motivation. If they have to go to work and they have to work hard to move up the ladder, they get frustrated. If they have to work harder to earn more money, they get frustrated. Right? They don't want to do this. This is why high turnover at work. Numerous job owners have told me, this new generation, they don't even give notice that they're not going to come to work. All of a sudden, they don't show up one day, and then they don't show up the next day. And then you call them, "Are you okay? Everything's okay?" And if they answer you, they'll just tell you, "I don't think this job's for me." It's like, well, what happened? Like, how did we go from that to that? So it's crazy. In fact, there's some data that they say that a lot of ADHD or ADD is misperceived or misdiagnosed these days, both in adults and in younger children, as ADHD or ADD, where in fact it's actually dopamine overconsumption, and where their dopamine is now dropped to baseline. So now they're trying to find, it's almost like a drug addict trying to find that next hit. They're trying to find it. And so they go from one thing to another. They can't stay focused. They go from playing video games to this other video game. I'm not getting my high. So then they get on social media and they can't get there, and they can't concentrate on things because they're just constantly, the brain is saying, get me what I crave, or whatever that craving is, right? It could be whatever it is at that moment. And so this can then lead to depression, which is obviously a mental health issue. And so there's ways that you can manage this, and we'll talk about how to get there, but the pursuit has to be the reward. So that's the key. It's ultimately trying to get people to get the pursuit to be the reward. So for example, what an example of like how can we build this into managing our dopamine? One example would be an ice bath. Here's a perfect example. So if you have an ice bath, you get a dopamine rise. You don't get it immediately because when you first go into the ice bath, it's painful, right? Just prepping to try to get in there. Why am I doing this? Can I do this? That takes mental stamina. Also takes some convincing, and your brain has to work to convince you to get there. But it ultimately sees the reward, whatever that reward may be, right? So then you go in and you suffer, right? You go in, it burns, it's painful. I can't make it. I can't survive. Then you get settled in. But then when you come out, and it could be, minutes or hours later, you get the dopamine rush then. And that's when your body starts feeling good. And then in the long run, you've done the right thing because this is helping your mitochondria, it's helping your resilience, mental, physical resilience, what have you. And so this is where you actually start to get the dopamine to be more stable. So it's rising slowly, it's stabilizing, and you're giving that brain what it needs, but in a very controlled manner. So let's shift and talk a little bit about food addiction. And here we have to talk about, a habit. So we have to define a habit versus an addiction because it's a very, very fine line. So when you define a habit is like, you guys know what it is. It's a routine, a custom, a tradition, or a pattern. And it's brain's way to try to become efficient. So this can happen automatically. A lot of times, let's say, we get in the car and there's certain things that we do once we get into the car. A lot of times we don't even think about it. It's not even blatant. We just go through it, right? It's just, exactly where your purse is. You got to put your seatbelt on. These are all automatic. You have to look before you back up. All these things become automatic. And so you create this loop. There's a cue or trigger. That's number one. Then you put it into action, and then you get the reward. The reward may be, for example, that you put your seatbelt in. So your cue is safety. So I need to, be safe in case I get in an accident. The action is, closing the seatbelt. The reward is that sensation that you've put yourself in a more safe environment. So that's the habit loop: 1, 2, and 3. Cue or trigger, the action, and then the reward. And in one study, they found that it takes roughly about, on average, there's a big spread, but on average, about 2 months for your brain to establish a new habit or routine where it becomes automatic. So over 2 months is how we establish some sort of routine habit in our brain. But habits are easy to eliminate. So we can, do things to change our habits, or at least for some. There's ways to change habits if there's a desire. Addictions, on the other hand, as we talked about, that's more of a chemical response, much more difficult, right? We talked about dopamine, serotonin, all that. So you need to be able to manage the addiction, so that you don't get into all the issues related with the dopamine toxicity, I will call it, or overdose of dopamine. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. There's data that supports that fasting actually can become an addiction. So you need to be really careful here too. So intermittent fasting or fasting over a long term, that can convert into an eating disorder. So you can have both sides of the spectrum: eating too much or even fasting, which is really interesting. So you have to be careful. And this is why Allah tells us to fast. You could tell us to fast all the time, right? Many months, many weeks, many days, but he tells you to fast during this month, and then maybe 1 or 2 days a week, or every so often. There's days and reasons, but his prescription is just for a month, and then you stop and you go back to your normal habit. You try to learn from this, but if he was to tell us to fast more chronically, this could also, on the flip side, turn into an eating disorder, and that again is tied to dopamine, because then at that point the dopamine starts to take a hit, whether you're eating too much or eating too little, and so that can also throw the whole instinct or habit off. So how can we stop a habit? Because a habit can become addiction. And the way we do that is to use interrupters. So some of the stuff that's been recommended is anytime you feel like you need to do something. So let's say your habit is, I need to eat at a certain time. Not hungry, but that's just what I do, right? That's my habit. That's what a lot of people tell me. Why are you drinking that cup of coffee? That's what I do. It's 3 o'clock, I have a cup of coffee. Or I had a friend of mine, he said, 10 a.m., I have my yogurt. That's when I have it. I have it at 10 a.m., not at 10:05, not at 9:45. At 10 o'clock is when I have my yogurt. So how can we break that, right? So it doesn't become an addiction. Is at that point when you decide that you're going to do something, you say, I'm going to go call a friend and just chat with them and get your high that way. Or another option is to just stop and start counting, like count to 3. And that is enough to put a distraction in where your brain will put a halt or break that habit loop. And so this is one method of distraction or interruption therapy. One thing I did want to also at this point, they were talking about food addiction data, and I mentioned that there's some genes. There was a study that was done that they found that children of parents with addiction, particularly food addiction, but this applies to across the board, are 8 times more at risk. So if it is in the family, then you have to be really, really careful, because your children or whoever is in your family has a higher propensity of developing addiction. And so you want to be really careful, very watchful that that doesn't become an issue. So let's use an example of why ultra-processed foods, we talked about processed and ultra-processed foods, are so addictive. So it's actually very intentional, and this is where you have to be really careful. So they've found a way where they can hijack your brain's reward system through these certain addictive substances, very similar to like alcohol and nicotine. that does the same thing. In fact, the University of Michigan did a study, and they actually, as part of their study, they defined ultra-processed foods as those intentionally designed with added fat and refined carbohydrates like sugar and white flour. So that's actually how University of Michigan researchers, before they ran their study, defined ultra-processed foods. And the big thing there, obviously, is certain fats, refined carbs, sugar, and white flour. There's other flavor enhancers that are used, and the study looked at that, things like sodium, high levels of sodium, that salt intake, something called monosodium glutamate, otherwise known as MSG. It's the stuff that you remember used to be filled in Doritos, and that's why I couldn't stop eating it. When I ate a Dorito chip, I couldn't stop until I finished a whole bag. There's also additives like caffeine. So this is like, for example, these energy drinks. They put all sorts of stuff in there, including caffeine, to get you addicted. This is also why people, I noticed a lot of times back in the day before the issues in Gaza, where I would every once in a while go into Starbucks, or I used to drop my son off at school and go to Starbucks and work. I wouldn't drink or eat anything. I'd just go sit there and use their internet and relax and try to sit down and get work done before school is over. And I noticed you see the same people at Starbucks. And so, obviously there it's the caffeine that is addictive, but more importantly, it's the sugar. If you look at the drinks that they make, the frappuccinos, this, that, and the other thing, it's fraught with tremendous amount of sugar to get you addicted. And that's the addiction that you need to be able to function, right? And these ultra-processed food manufacturers, this is what they've worked on. Another aspect, so this is another aspect of sodas, for example. A lot of people are addicted to sodas. I know I had a friend of mine who he was a colleague at work. He would drink a 12-pack of, I think it was Coke or something. And so it was interesting because when I talked to him, it was an addiction. And once he stopped it, he lost a tremendous amount of weight. He felt better, more energized, what have you. So it was the sugar, but it was interesting for him, and this has been well known too, it's the carbonation. It's that sensation of the feel in the mouth of the carbonation, you feel satisfied. And until he got that, obviously the caffeine didn't hurt, neither did the sugar, but for him it was the mouthfeel of the carbonation. So you want to be really careful on that. And this is why if you're addicted to Pepsi, Coke, any of these soft drinks or what have you that have that fizziness to it, your interrupter is, rather than those, using maybe get one at home or just buy some cans of water that don't have any caffeine or sugar or anything in there. And so you can then use that as a tool to satisfy that mouthfeel without the toxicity of the enhancers or any of the sugars, what have you. Sugars, again, and refined carbs, carbohydrates, amongst many other things that we've talked about, the harms that it can cause. It's kind of similar to that cocaine example I gave. It's a high dose, high reward. So you drink the Coke or you eat a cookie or cake or whatever it is, the frappuccino, whatever, and you get this high dose of dopamine rush. And so your brain registers that. It's very fast, very similar to cocaine. So it goes right to the brain. And like we said, the risk is when it goes up fast and it's quick, meaning you don't have to work or do anything to get there. All you got to do is open the can, drink it, or go to Starbucks, drink it, and boom, you get your dopamine hit. And these food manufacturers know this very much, including the restaurants and what have you. And so they know that to give you that kind of quote unquote bliss point, we need to take certain things such as sugar, certain fats that are not good for you, salt, excessive amount of salt. And this is why people get addicted to things like chips, tub of ice cream, put it away, no problem. I know myself, I'm guilty of that. I can sit down and eat chips. This is why I don't even buy them and put them in the house, because I could go through Doritos or any kind of chips very quickly. By the time you get to that point of the dopamine being so high and realizing, uh-oh, what have I done? Before your prefrontal cortex says, wait a minute, why did you just do? It's too late. The damage is already done. So it's very, very difficult. So we talked one about neurotransmitter deficiency being a cause. We talked about your genetics potentially being a cause. Another one, actually this is most recent data, very, very interesting. And there's a lot of this popping up everywhere, both on, I think, social media. I've heard that there's a lot of conversation around this. I know certainly within the healthcare community, there's a lot of conversations around this, is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, otherwise known as NAD. So this is actually really interesting because people that have addiction, people that deal with addiction, there's actually indication that this NAD, which is part of the Krebs cycle that we talked about yesterday, creates energy. It's a very, very important part. It's your kind of your superhero of your cells, if you will, the mitochondria. This takes a nosedive. So people that have addiction have NAD deficiency. So this is really, really interesting with most recent data to show that, looking at this and potential opportunities to use NAD treatment for addiction recovery. And I know that like a lot of these healthcare centers or these boutique shops or what have you, these medical boutique shops, they're now offering NAD shots. And so you can go there and get NAD to get more energy, get detoxification, all the other things to give you your energy throughout the day, improve your brain function, right, to optimize your brain function. And there's evidence to suggest that it's intended also for to slow down the aging process or for vitality and longevity. So there's a lot of excitement around NAD, but really even more exciting is that using NAD for addiction recovery might become something that is of the future. And so this could play a big, big role into mental health and some of the issues that we're dealing with, unfortunately, in a more natural setting. NAD is actually involved in 500 chemical reactions in the body. So it is not something that is to be taken lightly. It's a big, big superpower. Like I said, we call it the superhero of the cells. And so it's there to create energy for us. It's absolutely critical. NAD helps with another product called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We might have talked about that as well during sleep last week. And it's just the overall energy. We have the adenosine, you have 3 phosphates, hence the term adenosine triphosphate. And then if you remember from last week, when the phosphates break off and you're left with adenosine, that's when you get sleepy. That's when your body says, I need to go get some rest so I can build up the ATP so I can get my energy to get back into my day, whether it's the next day or whether you're depleted enough that you need sleep. So for example, if somebody's playing soccer, these professional athletes that play soccer, professional basketball players or what have you, they deplete their ATP very quickly. They build up adenosine and then they feel like they need to take a nap to replenish it, right? So NAD plays a big, big role in that as well. And so if you have insufficient NAD levels, then the body can't maintain and rev almost like an engine, like it should. Really interesting. It also is really, NAD is also very important, as I said, in over 500 functions for brain function and mental health also. So it plays a big role into neurotransmitter synthesis, things like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, any of the other hormones that are in the brain. And so for your brain cells to be able to function, you need NAD. And if you lower NAD, then this can lead to mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and obviously, like we talked about, addiction. is another big factor. So, so this is something that's very exciting. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. One thing to note is that NAD does lower as you get older. So if you're older and you already have NAD levels that are low, then you have to be watchful. Even then, that's when some age-related diseases come in, but also addiction can play a big factor here. And so if we can increase NAD levels, and there's natural ways of doing it other than just getting the injection, you can actually slow aging and improve your longevity. So overall, it'll be a really good thing for your health, for you to be around longer with your kids or with your family, for you to live a more vibrant, vital life without some of the disease and issues that we deal with related to aging, and all the other conditions that can come as a result of it. NAD deficiency is a common issue, they found, and hence why we're seeing it. Why we're seeing such an increase in addiction and mental health disorders such as depression and anxiety. So this as an option may be something that we can really leverage for humanity as well as for our communities. So let's see. One thing I wanted to mention, things like smoking, drinking, drug use, these things can actually deplete your NAD, and it does this through your vitamin B3. So if you remember back, I said about alcohol can be a vitamin B deficiency. It's actually one of the big ones is vitamin B3. So vitamin B3, which is niacin, which is a really great thing to have. And if you can supplement with niacin, there's tremendous benefits. Cholesterol, your heart, as well as several other functions within the body, because niacin is the precursor to NAD. So you could easily get the same effects as NAD supplementation by just using niacin. And ideally, you don't want to use niacinamide. Niacinamide was created or is there because it doesn't create the flush. So if any of you have taken certain vitamins, or if you've taken niacin, especially like if you went to the hospital or whatever, they gave for a reason, they gave you niacin, like for heart or whatever, it can make you flush. And it happened, it scared me to death one day when I took a multivitamin. It had high amounts of niacin in there. My face started to flush up. I started to almost feel like a burning and kind of jittery and panicky. And it was like a loop because I wasn't certain what's going on. I might have a heart attack or something, or stroke or something. And so as a result of that, they created niacinamide, or you have niacinamide, which doesn't have. So it has niacin, but it doesn't have that kind of flushing effect. The problem is niacinamide is not as effective. But niacin is a wonderful supplement to be utilizing, and that might be just as good as taking NAD shots. So something to consider, consult with your doctor, make sure there isn't any potential ramifications. But niacin, if you have cholesterol, if you have heart issues, niacin, certainly if you have depression, anxiety, if you feel like you're dealing with addiction, or somebody is dealing with addiction, definitely niacin or vitamin B3 is something to consider. So what are some of the signs of NAD or niacin deficiency? Fatigue, low energy. Why? Because you're not creating enough ATP. So if you see people that are tired, they're lethargic, they're not motivated, they just can't feel like they can function, think NAD or niacin is at play there. Muscle soreness and weakness. So these people, again, they have a hard time moving. They have a hard time, exercising, walking, running. These are going to be living more sedentary life because they're fatigued and they have muscle soreness. And then what happens is then they start to gain weight as a result, because you're not being as, as motivated to move. You deal with insomnia or different types of difficulties. They get brain fog, cognitive impairment. A lot of people have had that brain fog, especially let's say, long COVID, things like that. There's been evidence to suggest that niacin or NAD can help with getting your brain to get back its vigor. And then you have decreased stamina or endurance. You just you can't keep up like you used to. Some say, I used to go run 4, 5, 6 miles per day. Now I can just barely get through 2 miles. I used to be able to play 2 soccer games in a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. Now I can barely even get through one. I used to be able to work out, almost every day, and now I can just barely do it once or twice a week. Though in those instances, think energy level that's mostly tied to ATP, NAD, and niacin should be something to be considered. So definitely give that a thought if you're hearing or seeing any of these symptoms or you're feeling it yourself. And we said that niacin also, you get a double bonus. It also will help with your cholesterol lowering. So if you remember from our talk yesterday, it will lower the LDL, the bad parts of LDL, so the type A's, the type B's, and it will increase your good cholesterol, your quote unquote good cholesterol, or the HDL. So it'll be very, very critical in helping you with your heart disease or cardiovascular issues. So let's talk about what they looked at. So what they found is higher doses of niacin, typically ranging like 1.5 to 3 grams per day, can reduce withdrawal symptoms and cravings related to addiction. This is NAD as well. This is how you correct the NAD deficiency. But this all needs to be monitored, as I mentioned, either NAD or high-level niacin through a healthcare professional. So this is not something you want to be, doing haphazardly at home, because you could potentially throw other aspects off and have long-term consequences, which is not good. Intravenous NAD is what's commonly used. So these are probably treatment centers or clinics that you're seeing pop up now for addiction or for other avenues. They give you IV. There has been some side effects related to it, similar to niacin, where you get that flushing. You feel kind of jittery. Some people get very sick, nauseated, that type of thing. So it can get pretty intense. Other people haven't had much side effects from it. So it depends on who you talk to, but it is something that needs to be definitely monitored. Again, my recommendation would be niacin first before you start investigating into NAD or spending a lot of the money there. It's much more expensive, but again, make sure you consult with your healthcare professional before you do anything on your own, especially at those levels. But one of the things that tied to this blessed month that's amazing is that fasting is actually a natural way to increase your NAD levels. So amazing, right? So I don't know if I mentioned in one of the talks or not, but there was a history of a guy who was extremely depressed, and he figured the way he's going to kill himself, how he's going to commit suicide, is to lock himself up and not eat. He wasn't going to eat or drink, so he locked him up in a room and he stayed there for several days, and thinking that he's going to kill himself by starving himself. Lo and behold, what happened is his depression went away, and he felt fantastic. And that was where there was some head scratch as to, well, what in the world happened? What was he doing in there? And it's just a mere fact of fasting and its effect in balancing the hormones, and in particular increasing your NAD levels. That was the only explanation of how this guy overcame his depression and went from one end of the spectrum to the other, where he lives a fruitful, normal life. So fasting, I would highly recommend keeping up with some sort of intermittent fasting. These would be either fasting like we do every once in a while. They highly recommend doing dry fasting at least 2-3 times a month, if possible, would be great. If not, at least once a month is great. And then intermittent fasting is also wonderful. So that would mean, like we've talked about, where you deprive yourself from, let's say, 6-7 o'clock at night all the way till, like, let's say 12 the next day. So good 18 hours, at least 18 hours or so. So that's another way of increasing your NAD levels. Other than that, basic fundamental stuff like exercise helps NAD. The appropriate nutrition. So staying away from processed foods, junk foods, keep your sugar and carbs to a minimum, and then getting also as a result of that quality sleep. How can you supplement? So we talked about, niacin. Another great thing, and I know we've talked about this in probably every conversation we've had, is omega-3 fatty acids. DHA, EPA found in fish oils. We've talked about cod liver oil. Salmon is great. Any of the small fishes, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, any of these things that people think are gross, they actually have tremendous levels of omega-3 fatty acids, which is great for your brain as well as most other aspects of your body. Creatine, I know we've talked about that, and I've highly suggested in people over the age of 35, 40 to take creatine. It helps brain energy metabolism. It's been known to improve memory and mental clarity. So it's something that gets depleted as we age. So you definitely want to be supplementing with creatine. Lion's mane mushroom is well known. It's a new, what we call a nootropic. And that's been known to grow new brain cells and improve memory and focus. There have been a lot of studies done on this. So lion's mane mushroom, either in the powder form or the actual mushroom itself. I love mushrooms, so I don't mind buying lion's mane. However, I want to be careful I don't take too much, because I do have lion's mane mushroom in a mushroom powder that I use, that I put either in my coffee if I have coffee, or I put it in my matcha tea. Sometimes I'll put it in my shake if I'm having a protein shake. I'll put the lion's mane mushroom in there. Great for brain health. In fact, even when I had my concussion, it really, really helped. And there's been a lot of evidence related to that. And then, of course, we've talked about this ad nauseum, is vitamin D. Very, very important to help increase your NAD levels. So I'll finish up with one last thing. I know we're running out of time. There was a study done actually in Stanford studying another well-known, it's a plant-based, actually psychoactive drug. It's called Ibogaine, Ibogaine, and it came out of a study that was done actually very recently, this year, in fact, 2025. It was published out of Stanford, that helps with brain health. And they studied this for PTSD, anxiety, depression, as well as traumatic brain injuries. And so they're looking at now Ibogaine related to addiction. So not only does it help brain repair, but it's also based on the science that they found to treat addiction. So this might be another tool in our armamentarium, including NAD and other aspects, that in the future might be something. It's still very early in the research phase. It's a root bark called a Tabernanthe iboga that is native to West Central Africa. And so they found that this has tremendous brain health in extremely profound ways. And so they're now looking and studying and looking at data to support the opioid addiction, and maybe potentially people that have had depression, psychological trauma, and brain injuries, obviously like these veterans that deal with it. They found that in the case of the veterans with the traumatic brain injuries, they looked at 30 male Special Operations Force veterans that suffered mild TBI. TBI is basically concussion, traumatic brain injury from either blasts or combat exposure. They had them actually go down to Mexico, interesting, because it's not legally used here. And so there in Mexico, they used this, what they call a mystic protocol, which was the Ibogaine combined with magnesium. Interestingly, we've talked about all the benefits of magnesium. And they found that in these veterans, it improved their PTSD, depression, and anxiety with only a month usage. So amazing, just very, very short period of time. So something else to be looking at to help potentially in the future with cognitive performance and also mental health issues, including addiction. In the study, they found it's very well tolerated with some mild side effects like nausea and headaches. Other than that, there was no serious adverse events noted. So it seems to have a good safety profile, but it was only 30 male participants. So we need a lot more evidence here. And they didn't, when they did the study, they did not use a placebo, so a sham. So not quite sure if there was other factors that could have played here, but most likely it was the benefit of the product itself. So there is evidence to suggest that Ibogaine can affect serotonin, which can get your mood better. It can affect dopamine. And also, very interestingly, it can actually impact glutamate, which is really good for learning and memory. So potentially something to look at in the future for people that have Alzheimer's, dementia. This might be kind of a tool that we might be able to use. It is, again, like I said, not approved here. FDA has not approved it for any medical use here. There are side effects that could be there, including dangerous arrhythmias or regular heartbeats. So it's something that they still need to look at. But nevertheless, this study from Stanford was really, really interesting and a great direction for us in the future as options. So hopefully this little brief summary of addiction was helpful. I hope none of you suffer from this. I hope you don't have any family members, but if you do, at least you have some tools, you have some experience and understanding that this has 3 prongs to it. So there is a genetic side to it that you want to be watchful for. Obviously, you can't change genes, but at least you can be watchful to have preventative aspects. The other thing is the hormonal or neurotransmitter effect of dopamine. You want to be careful you're not stimulating dopamine excessively or doing it with big spikes and getting these troughs. So that's something you can actually implement yourself and for your family members and friends and colleagues. And then the last one is this NAD aspect that there's a deficiency there that you might be able to address through the recommendations that I gave and many other ways that you can get there. So hopefully some tools for you to be able to use in your lives, and inshallah, Allah always gives you the blessing and the tawfiq to be able to live your life happily, healthy, and away from any kind of addiction or any kind of abuse. And with that, I wish you all a very blessed day of Eid. If it is indeed tomorrow, I wish you much joy and success in the upcoming year. And I will continue to keep you in my thoughts and prayers. And as I hope you will keep me in mind, you keep your prayers, keep me in your prayers and thoughts. And if there is, again, a delay in Eid, the moon is not sighted, I will do a program tomorrow. I'll try to find something interesting and different to talk about. And if not, then inshallah, we'll pick this up. If you are interested in certain topics and would like me to talk about it, I'm more than happy to cover them in future. Otherwise, I will, inshallah, see you all. And inshallah, you have a wonderful day of Eid with your families. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.